The Heart Below Zero, written by Leon Won the Lion and David Pugsack. Calvin walked into a room holding a comic book. His little boy and girl, who were bouncing upon the bed, became even more excited seeing him hold it. "How are my children tonight?" he asked. "Are you ready to go to bed?" he said with a wink and a smile. The little kids cried out no, as they expected him to read tonight, as he did every night. They protested and explained that he was supposed to read to them. "Ah," said the father, "so you want me to read a story and then you can go to bed?" The little children cried out no again. "Oh, so you just want to go to bed without reading stories?" replied Calvin. "No," they cried out. "We want you to read all night long." "All night?" he said in a shocked voice. "Wouldn't that be well past your bedtime?" he asked, prodding them again. "No bedtime," they cried out. He gave a hearty laugh and said, "All right," sitting down in the chair. The two children immediately climbed up on him and sat in his lap, so he could read to them. "I don't think we're going to skip bedtime, but we can definitely read a comic." He showed them the comic's cover and read the title, Ultra Warm, the last issue. Can a frozen heart be warmed? "It can't be the end," his little boy whined. "Ultra Warm has to keep fighting more bad guys." He looked into his daddy's eyes, hoping he was joking. "Well, we'll just have to find out," said Calvin, opening the comic book, and began to read it. His children began getting very excited as he got to the very end of the comic book, reading aloud. "Our heart is cold, Ultra Warm. You are never going to warm us up, and you're never going to get to Dr. Zero." One of the henchmen said to Ultra Warm, "He's gonna turn the whole world like us, and then we'll never be outcasts again. Once everyone is the same, no one will be hated anymore." "There is no cold that can't be warmed up with love," he replied, parrying with his forearm one of the kicks from a figure cloaked in darkness. Then he grabbed him by the shin. With a hard yank, pulled them toward himself, grabbing their upper body and embracing them upon his chest. A warm glow came from Ultra Warm. The darkness disappeared around him, and the temperature rose by a few degrees. The other goons attacked him, and they all fell the same way. After the warmest hug they'd ever felt, they realized in tears that somebody actually loved them. "Now, go home, all of you, to the warmth of your homes and to your families. You don't have to be afraid anymore. I will melt Dr. Zero's heart as well," he said with a voice that could cut through the cold like a spring wind after the winter, and started down the corridor getting deeper into the lair of the villain. Calvin's phone rang, and his kids got worried that he would disappear as he listened to the sound of the only phone in the house ringing on the counter. He knew his wife would grab it in a minute, but he looked into his children's eyes, worried that he might be leaving for the night. "Don't worry," he told them. "It's probably just Mommy's wife." "Mommy doesn't have a wife," they protested. "She's married to you." "Oh," said Calvin. "I forgot. Sometimes she talks to everyone else so much, I think she's married to them." He chuckled at his own joke. "No, Daddy," they protested. "You're married to Mommy." "All right, junior detectives," he said. "How do you prove it?" He gave them a wink and waited for their answer. His boy stated that it was because he was his dad and she was his mom. His daughter stated that it was because they gave each other hugs and kisses every day, and that's what made them married to each other. He gave a hearty laugh at both of them before his wife marched into the room, saying it was for him. "And will you stop telling the children I have a wife?" she said with a resenting voice. "I'll see you in a minute," he said. "I gotta take care of this." He gave them a kiss on the forehead before leaving. Disappointed, the children reluctantly got off his lap and watched him leave. He got to the phone and listened for a few minutes before hanging it up. He turned to his wife. "Sorry, Rose. I have to go check on the Willisons. They were supposed to check in today, but no one has heard from them," Calvin said. "Their younger boy, Jade, had his magic going out of control, so I need to go see what the situation is." "You're a detective. Why are they sending you and not an officer?" his wife protested. Calvin knew she was trying to talk him out of leaving, and that she was stalling for time, afraid that he may never come back. She did this quite often, but tonight she was looking at him like it was the last time she would ever see him. "It'll be okay," Calvin replied. The worried look only got worse. He realized there was nothing he could do to calm her down. He could only explain why he had to go. "It's a small town," Calvin replied. "We don't have a division for handling magic like the bigger cities. The detective division is more equipped to handle the magic than the police officer division, mostly because of the amount of research we do on magic. So we've been given the job to deal with these sorts of things when they occur." "I don't see why all of this is necessary," she said. "Why don't they just seal away people's magic if they can't control it?" "I wish it was that easy," Calvin replied. "But with magic having a mind of its own, it can be pretty hard to do sometimes. We've tried sealing his magic multiple times, but he keeps breaking the seals. It does have a will of its own, and that will is usually to be useful to its partner," he stated. His wife stared at him with a blank face. "When did you start believing that magic was its own entity?" she asked him. Calvin could feel her buying time, her eyes still begging him not to leave. It took a moment to reply. "I suppose I have changed my mind on that, haven't I? There was another possibility, I guess. I didn't even notice. I've been looking into it a lot, with me being a detective and seeing all the reports from the other scientists. Technology hasn't really caught up to the level where people can fully understand magic, and yet the government is just as slow to acknowledge it as the general public. Everyone wants to have the same level of understanding of magic that humanity had before technology began to catch up with it, leaving it mysterious and unknown. But that's besides the point, love. I need to get going," he said, kissing her on the forehead. She stood up on her toes, kissing him. She was already missing him, as though she would never see him again, and held him like she would never let him go. He let her go, much to her dismay. His two kids walked into the room and gave him the ultra-warm hug of protection that he had read to them in the comics. He gave a hearty laugh and gave the ultra-warm hug of protection back, before giving them a kiss, saying goodbye. As he left, he took one last look at his wife, holding his children's hands, looking at him as though she would never see him again, on the verge of tears. He headed towards his car, reading the Roaring Unicorn logo on it. He loved his car as he ran his fingers down the hood before opening the door and firing up the engine, listening to it purr. After a minute, he reached for the phone, hooked up to the magic mirror. In every detective's car, the rear-view mirror was a magic mirror. They could even see each other, and it didn't require any energy. It also worked anywhere, even underground. It was set up to be used in a more conventional system, so they were able to make phone calls with it now. How it worked eluded Calvin, but all that he knew, he understood the basics a little bit, knowing that it was a combination of magic and technology now, allowing him to call people on the landline. His police station was the first to test out the prototypes, as they worked wonderfully so far. He called his partner Devin. "All right," Devin replied. "I've been pulling up the information we have on the families and calling some of their relatives and neighbors. Apparently, nobody's heard from them in a week," he said. "Devin, you work too hard," Calvin said. "You need to relax a little bit. Everything is going to be okay. I'm sure they just forgot to call in, and they've been trying to help their child." When Devin got into the car, he immediately took the time to talk about everything they knew about the family, reading directly from the oldest report they had going forward. The youngest child in the family is a magic host. He's most likely a newborn magic hive, given that magic can reproduce on its own like many single-celled organisms. We are not sure of where it came from or who was the original host of its ancestor. "Devin," Calvin said, giving him a passive-aggressive glare, "you really need to stop breaking this habit of reading the entire report. I've read it, and I don't need it read back to me. You never know when old information will trigger trigger a new idea, Devon replied. It's best to be extra thorough. There was a moment of odd silence as the two could feel each other's glares on them even though they weren't looking at the other detective. They both ran through their heads the previous arguments that they had made the last time they got started on this. They both evaluated that it wasn't worth arguing over again, and Devon began reading the reports again while Calvin rolled his eyes. The child had magic for at least 4 years that we're aware of. At first, it was not that big of a problem, as they had the child in for training to control it, as well as getting it sealed. A few years ago, he began getting bullied for being different, and it seems like that's when the problems began. When his emotions were disheveled, he began to lose control of his power. His family and friends would soon start getting little nips of freezes from being around him, so they began to distance themselves further and further from him. They could both feel their stomachs churning, as this was a hard one to read. The psychiatrist that he was seeing, Dr. Smith, had reported that he was starting to feel more and more lonely, and it would seem to escalate his powers going out of control. About 3 months ago, due to him not being able to control his power anymore because of bullying, he was put into homeschool. A week ago, they took a vacation to try and help the family get back together, but nobody's heard from them since, and they missed their report that they were supposed to submit today. Perhaps they forgot because they were making progress, Calvin said, as they pulled up. There was an odd chill about the house, with icicles hanging off the deck and frost unusually accumulating on the front porch and on parts of the grass as well, even though it was well into spring. Better take this. Devon handed Calvin a talisman. It's the new Stay Warm talisman that the department developed. We should be safe as long as we have these. The two climbed out of their car and began to investigate the surroundings around the house that the Willisons had rented. As I said, maybe they're just chilling inside and forgot to report, Calvin said. But as the words left his mouth, he knew that they were not true, no matter how bad he wanted them to be. Don't think so, Devon replied with a cold voice. He examined the whole house and the surrounding area, looking at all the snow and ice, slowly melting in the place furthest away from the buildings, staying cold next to the house. Calvin fished out a lens from the inner pocket of his coat and looked through it, trying to locate the source of the magic and any traps or danger that could harm them. They didn't need the lens to find the source. It was clear as daylight. It was coming from the frozen house. But Calvin still held it up before his eyes, controlled by force of habit and pure fear. They could never be sure its power was malicious or if it would go wild just like it did before. Magic was just as dangerous when it went rogue as it was useful while people could keep it under control. And it was not just some blind force like electricity that could be harnessed and enslaved. It had a mind and will of its own. They listened at the door from inside. A faint, distorted sob could be heard. At least somebody's alive, Devon said. Maybe they're all alive, Calvin replied, frustrated. They knocked on the door repeatedly, trying to see if anybody would reply. When nobody did, they tried entering the dwelling. They found that the door was unlocked, but something was wedged at the bottom. They both rammed the door at the same time. It took 3 tries before it finally gave, and they broke in. The lower portion stayed in place. It was completely frozen solid. They looked around the house, seeing it was covered in ice and water vapor in the air, crystallizing and settling on the furniture like a fine covered snow. Inside, it was deadly cold. They both pulled their coats tighter and then looked for a switch to turn on the lights. They found it, but it was frozen solid, so they turned their flashlights on instead. They started going in the direction of the weeping, which was becoming louder and louder as they approached it. First, they heard only fragments of words, and then they heard some full sentences, as well as muttering mixed in with the crying. And in the back bedroom, they finally found the little boy whose magic went rampant, leaving the entire room cased in ice. Their hearts skipped a beat as they found him frozen to his bed, covering himself with the sheets as though he was in the process of shielding himself from something but didn't finish. Standing over him, trying to shield his body, was an ice golem, which seemed to be the only living thing as it cried out, "Please, don't hurt me. This is my body. I must protect it. Mom, Dad, please. I mean it. I'll be good. I didn't want to hurt anyone. Please forgive me. Please. I'll make it right, Dad. I promise, Mom. I didn't mean to," he muttered to himself, not even noticing the two detectives, who shone their lights on him. They shifted the rays of their torches to the center of the room where the golem was facing. There was a big pile in the center of the room. At first it was hard to make out what it was. Devin almost threw up as he realized he was looking at the family, frozen in time with terror and shock on their faces. The mother and father trying to protect their little child with their bodies, but there was no escape from the cold, and they were all turned into grotesque ice statues. Calvin looked back at the golem with feelings of pity and dismay. It was not his fault, yet it was. Then, in the light of the torch, he saw that the golem bent down and picked up an object. It was a comic covered in ice. The book was open to the last page, showing the end. Calvin recognized it immediately as the comic book he was reading to his children. Then the ice golem began to read from the page. Ultra Warm could feel the temperature dropping even lower as he headed down the corridor which led to the den of Dr. Zero. "You are finally here," the mad scientist dressed in shadows exclaimed. "Dr. Zero, I came to put an end to your suffering. You'll never feel the cold of being alone anymore. Let me give you an embrace so warm, so tender, that it was never given before," Ultra Warm replied, taking a step closer. "I have the perfect plan to never feel alone anymore. I'll freeze everyone so no two people can find each other in the dark on a cold night anymore. What I feel will not be called loneliness anymore. It will just be how things are from today. I just need to deal with you first, Ultra Warm." And as he reached into the shadows surrounding him, he pulled out a freeze ray gun. "Witness my freeze ray!" He let out a mad laugh and aimed the ray at Ultra Warm, then pulled the trigger. Steam rose as the ray hit Ultra Warm's chest, but he took a step in the direction of the doctor, and then another, and then another. When there was no more steps between the two, the hero reached his arms and hugged the villain with everything he had left. The shadows disappeared and the temperature rose as the doctor hugged Ultra Warm back. But it was too much even for such a hero. He collapsed almost immediately. He exhausted all that he had. The doctor started crying now, finally freed from his curse. The glacier tears in his eyes melted. Crying, the golem dropped the comic book and turned towards his family. "No, Father, I'll be good from now on. I promise, okay?" The golem sobbed as he crawled toward the pile of bodies. "I promise I won't hurt anyone. Please, don't think of me as Dr. Zero. I don't want to be like him. I want to be like Ultra Warm. I can save you. Please, just don't hurt me. It'll be quick, and then everything will be okay. I can save you just like Ultra Warm saved the villain. And then I'll be gone, and you guys will be back, and you'll all be safe," he said, crying. Wincing at nothing, he paused, covering himself, fearing the wrath of his family for something wrong that he may have done. When nothing happened, he continued towards his family. Once there, he opened his arms and tried to embrace his family members. "It'll be okay," he said. "I'll save you with the warmest hug. You won't have to be cold anymore." The ice golem stayed there for several minutes. Calvin decided he would break the silence to help the golem. Devin protested, but Calvin went anyways. He touched the golem's shoulder gently. "They are gone now. We should go," he said with compassion. "Who are you?" The childish the golem asked, shielding his face, as though he was expecting to be scolded or attacked. "I am Detective Calvin," he replied. "I came here to help you guys. The detectives only show up at the end when everything is over. I need a hero to save my family, someone to stop the bad before it happens," the golem said, distraught. Calvin opened his mouth to protest, but he never got a chance. The temperature in the room dropped immediately, and Calvin felt the teeth of a cold snap at his fingers on the shoulder of the ice golem. He tried pulling his hand away, but it was stuck, and he had to slide it out of his glove, leaving the glove on the ice golem's shoulder. "Run," he shouted, and they did. Devin was already picking up on what was about to happen and was headed for the door. Icicles shot from the ice golem and began tearing up the room, while a strange, low groan emerged from his throat. It exploded after them, and Devin could feel it coming. He slipped one arm out of his coat and then the other, dropping to a slide using his coat as a makeshift shield. He found that the coat stopped most of the ice as he was on the outskirts of the icy wave, but his leg was stuck as the coat didn't cover it. He looked back, calling out for Calvin, but found that he was completely frozen, his torch causing an icy glow to glow around him. Devin's heart felt like it stopped beating as he looked at his partner, completely cased in ice, unable to move. He began trying to get out, but his foot wouldn't let him, so he pulled out his gun and shot at the ice until it broke, leaving him limping towards the car with a frozen. Once out at their car, Devin radioed the station using the magic mirror. "We need magic users at 14 Chasm Lane. This one has gone completely wild. We can't stop it," he exclaimed from the sprint. "My partner's down. We need medical help immediately." "We already know," replied a voice. "The talisman you gave us note as soon as they were active, and we started prepping men to go after you. According to the talisman, your leg is frozen, and Calvin is completely frozen. The appropriate team and medics are en route to your direction right now. The only thing we don't know is what's the full situation is with the child. Can you fill us in?" Devin spent the next several minutes explaining the situation and how the team needed to handle it when they got there. Soon the support team arrived to subdue and take away the ice golem. After that, they carried out the body of Calvin, completely cased in ice. Devin looked as they loaded him on the stretcher into the ambulance. His flashlight was dimming and then started to flicker before going completely dark. After that, they loaded the rest of the family onto other ambulances to go to the hospital. Devin knew Calvin's wife personally, and he couldn't live with himself not telling her. He went to her house that night with a crutch in one arm. The medics advised him not to, but he couldn't not do it. He got there and rang the doorbell. Rose answered the door. She was shy and hesitant once she saw Devin there instead of Calvin. She was on the verge of breaking down. "I'm sorry," Devin said. He choked, trying to get the rest of the words out, but he couldn't. He didn't have to. Rose already knew and began breaking down into tears. 2 weeks later, Devin stood outside of the containment chamber of the ice golem, looking over the report he'd written. He was hoping maybe he could find a way to help the creature, but couldn't. The conclusion was that the magic believed that he was the child that he was bound with, and it made his personality completely his own. Then, when they tried to bury all of his family, the magic was still attached to the boy. This caused him to break containment and find his body. When he got there and dug it up, he saw the graves of the rest of the family and began digging them up as well, as he loved them just as the little boy did. They could do nothing to stop him. He was like a blizzard, becoming more unstable when they tried to separate him from his family. So they moved the bodies here, hoping it would. He kept the room below zero so they would not decompose. Although they're not sure that was his intention. He kept reading from the last page of Ultra Warm, trying to mimic what he did to save his family. Devin found that the ice golem was in such a confused state it almost seemed as if it was reliving the same day over and over again. He always tried to hug his family and bring them back to life in exchange for his own, and then would fail, causing him to go crazy, and this happened every single day. They've tried counseling and memory erasing, but nothing helped him so far. No one was sure if he would ever recover. Most likely he'd be in this state for the rest of his life, except that people running out of hope he would ever recover. He turned to see Calvin walking up to him. He seemed a little surprised to see him there. "They finally let you out of the hospital. Weren't your injuries pretty bad?" Devin greeted him. "They weren't too bad," he said. "The talisman you gave me right before we went stopped my body from going so cold it wouldn't freeze, but it let it go cold enough to shut down all of my organs, meaning that I didn't need oxygen, but I was in a sort of cryo state. I think that's what they called it," he said, scratching his head. "It sure is amazing what the research and development crews have come up with." He complimented the device that saved his life. The two of them embraced in a hug. "Good to have you back," said Devin, giving him a pat on the back. "It's good to be back," Calvin replied, returning the pat. "All right, let's go," said Devin, walking down the hallway with Calvin following him. "Where are we going?" Calvin asked. "To talk to the commissioner, of course," said Devin. I have a request for him. Calvin seemed a little confused about what was going on. "Well," Devin replied, "I've been doing a lot of thinking about what the ice golem had said before he went crazy. About how we always show up after everything and never stop anything. And so seeing how you survived because of the heat talisman, I've come up with an idea. We should use our skills as a detective to help the families get proper equipment. I mean, when such problems arise, to save their lives." "You mean like giving people talismans to protect them from magic when it goes rogue like that?" Calvin asked, somewhat surprising. "Of course," said Devin. "We should always be looking forward to the future and make it a much better place."